endurance sport is about pushing your limit, working hard towards a specific goal and achieving what you felt was impossible yesterday. But intrinsic to that means that once you've accomplished your goal, you're sometimes left with the question, what's next? What's the next big thing, the big challenge that I could set my eyes on for next time? But what's the king event that reigns supreme above all other, that is the most difficult, the most challenging, the big thing that you should set your eyes on? And basically, what's more difficult? Running an ultra marathon or completing an Ironman? That's a big question that a lot of marathoners ask themselves. So today I want to present my perspective as to what I think is the hardest one and which one is the right one for you. Hi, Simon here. Welcome to my channel. My channel is meant to inspire you and provide you guidance to push your own limits. I'm myself an ultra runner focusing on a 100-mile ultra marathon. I've been racing a 100-mile ultra marathon at least every month for about 3 years now. And it's not just volume here. I'm racing some of the toughest ultra marathon out there. Badwater 135 in Dead Valley where the temperature go into 120. I've raced Ouray 100 mile, a race at high altitude with 40,000 feet of elevation gain. And I've also completed Cocodona 250, a 250-mile race in Arizona. But something that might surprise people familiar to the channel, I've also done some Ironman, only 2 of them, and it's never been my main sport. So of course, the discussion today, I have a bias. I'm much more an ultra runner and trail runner than an Ironman. But I have completed 2 Ironman, and that was also not my primary goal of that season. So even my preparation was less than serious, which for Ironman, a lot of people are very surprised. Wow, like your whole life was not dedicated to training for an Ironman? No. And it's not because it's easy, it's just because it was not my priority at the time and I was satisfied with simply finishing these events. But I do have experience racing both, and I want to share that experience with you, both as to what I think is the hardest, but more importantly, which one is the right one for you? What are the distinctions? Because I don't think it's a linear scale of this is this hard and this is this hard. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And maybe through this discussion, you can identify better to one or the other and have your own adventure. I'll try to be as neutral as possible, but obviously there's one that I prefer and I'm transparent about that. But it's not that Ironmen are not fun. It's not that Ironmen are a bad event. It's just that's not the best fit for my personality and what I'm looking for, but maybe it is for you. And the reason I'm making this video today, which is a little bit outside of what I typically do, first is I just felt like it. I have some opinion about it that I want to share with you, but also it's a common question that a lot of marathoner faces at some point. You set your eyes on a marathon, you do one, and sometimes it's one and you're done and you never think about it anymore. But for people that stick to the sport, then typically what you try to do is you try to do a faster marathon and then a faster marathon. But at some point, the novelty of it disappears for some runners. And then you have basically 3 options as to how you can push yourself a little further. Obviously, there's more than 3 options, but there's 3 very common ones. The first one is more the linear path where you say, okay, I've done a marathon. I'm relatively happy with my time. How about I try to qualify for Boston? Or how about I try to do a sub 3-hour marathon? And you really focus on perfecting your art in terms of marathon running. The second one is a transition to triathlon and eventually potentially to an Ironman. You're a good runner, cycling doesn't sound too hard, and hey, I like water, or maybe you're scared of the water, which is a good challenge for you. And the final path, which is the path that I've taken myself, is I didn't really care about going fast, but I cared about going further, and that's how I entered trail and ultra running. I don't think any of these options is better than the other, but I do think that they are very different, and based on what you want to accomplish and based on what you enjoy, one option might be better for you than the others. So let's cover the basics though. What's an ultramarathon? An ultramarathon is a race, a foot race, that you will cover a distance that is above a marathon. Now that would be the very technical definition, but the more practical one is that most events will start at 50K or higher, and the typical distance will be 50K, 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile. And yes, we switch between metrics and miles, 50K might not sound much more than a marathon, it's just 8 more kilometers, but it does make a big difference. And actually I talk about it in my video about are you ready for an ultra marathon and the different things that you need to learn and practice to become an ultra runner at various distances. Also, although we're talking about ultra marathon, most ultra marathons are on trail, but not all of them. And a lot of trail race are ultra marathon, but not all of them. You do have ultra marathon that will be on the road. For example, Badwater was only on road, and you have quite a lot of trail half marathon, trail marathon. And obviously there's a distinction here between doing a trail ultra marathon and a road ultra marathon. But because it's much more common to do a trail one, then I'll be focusing more on the trail ultra marathon. What about Ironman? An Ironman is a triathlon of a specific distance, meaning first you go and you swim 2.4 miles, then you hop on your bike, you do 112 miles, and then you run a marathon. So for a total of 140.6, which is the number that you will see quite often. You also have half Ironman, which I guess are Ironman but not Ironman, which are 70.3. But if we're talking about the sport more broadly of triathlon, there's also shorter distances and even longer than an Ironman. So first, let's address the elephant in the room based on the description now, is that you can't really compare both because one is more of a sport in general of various distance with event that will range in time between something like 4 hours all the way to 100 hours. And the Ironman, which is usually a fixed time, which I believe is around 18 or 19 hours, and a fixed distance. So what I'll do is I'll compare a full Ironman to 140.6 to a 100-mile ultra marathon. But you'll see in the description that I make below that actually sometimes it's relevant to think about the specific distance for the ultra marathon, but a lot of the points will cover regardless of the distance that you're doing, any triathlon and any ultra marathon, and then you would just need to match the level a little bit. The second piece is that not all races are the same, and what I mean by that is the course is different. That's true for Ironman, but that's especially true for a trail ultra marathon. For the 100-mile distance, my fastest 100 mile is a 16 hour, 18 minute, and my slowest is 50 hours. That's a time 3 difference. And the difference was not because I had a bad day. The difference is really because one was going up and down on crazy mountain and the other one was flat. But also for Ironman, you all have courses that are a little bit more hilly. You'll have course, for example, you're swimming in the ocean. Sometimes it's going to be a lake, which is a little easier. So for both, I'll be thinking much more about kind of an average course, but I'll discuss a little bit that there is variety. Finally, there's a huge difference between finishing any of these races in a specific time or trying to rank and be competitive or just completing. I'm not a pro. You're probably not a pro. We're doing that for fun. So I'll talk about it in the mindset of simply completing the race under the cutoff as a mid-packer, as someone who has a full-time job and cannot dedicate 40 hours of training every week. And the final thing I really want to emphasize is, sure, in the thumbnail, I'll say what's harder, an Ironman or an ultra marathon. First of all, we said, we're going to go with the fixed distance, but also it's much more than simply what's harder. First, because some things will be harder for certain people than others. So it depends on your natural inclination and what you're used to. But also I want to discuss about the difference between these sports, not just from a challenge perspective, but also to see what you identify to most. What are you seeking yourself? And see, hey, you know what? That's the one I want to do. And not necessarily because it's the hardest, but because this is the type of challenge that you're looking for yourself. So Ironman versus ultra marathon. And I'm going to divide the discussion in 3 categories. The first one is everything that kind of happened in between races. So not the race day itself, but preparation, what goes into the sport. Then we're going to talk about race day. And finally, about other consideration that you might want to consider when you're getting into the sport. Let's talk about preparation. Everything that happened between races, all the way to the starting line. And we focus so much on these comparisons on race day. How difficult is it on race day? But race day is usually 1, 2, or 3 times a year. So I think the preparation is what's going to impact your life much more. Very relevant to what you should choose and what actually match your lifestyle and what you want to do. Race day is fun and all, but the training also is pretty important. And the first thing that comes to mind when we're comparing both sport is about the time commitment. And I think for this one, Ironman is much more time consuming when it comes to the training. The fact that you're doing 3 different sports makes it much more time consuming. You have to practice all 3 of them. You have to have a fairly complex training plan where you need to remember sometimes you have to go swimming, sometimes you go cycling, sometimes you go running, not just how you're feeling about it. Whereas ultra running, it's much more focused on mileage. Yes, you have a training plan, but you can easily swap days. And very often you can just start running outside of the door, except if you want to go trail running and you need to drive for that. And that's a big thing also in terms of time commitment. For example, for me, you need to get to the water, and just driving back and forth and everything outside of the actual training session takes much more time than when you're training for an ultra marathon. But at the same time, that creates variety, which I think is interesting. And the variety that I can find in ultra running myself is the training run that you do around your neighborhood is kind of boring. But on weekends, if you have time and you're able to go on trail, which is highly recommended, it makes it much more interesting. And related to that will be the cost. Ironman is hands down way more expensive for different reasons. First, registration for a race itself is usually much more expensive. That's something that has been talked about a lot. But even beyond that, you'll have a lot of different costs. And when you actually look at the different sport you'll be doing for a triathlon, the running is the cheapest one. In terms of gear, the biking will be pretty expensive and you can always pay for something that is better. You can go low budget, but at the end of the day, you still need a bike, you still need a helmet, you might need a wetsuit, and then you have running gears. So pretty expensive, but it's not like trail running is cheap itself. So ultra running, if it was on road, wouldn't be too bad. You need mostly just shoes. But once you start going on trail and in mountain, then you'll have to have more equipment, different types of shoes, some warm clothing, some rain jacket, a running vest, these sorts of things. A watch also, which you probably will have anyway for a triathlon. But all in all, if you look at the price of a new bike, especially a TT bike, a specialized bike, pretty pricey sometimes. And we've discussed it. There's much more gear associated to triathlon. And although the gear is important when you're trail running, having the right gear at the right time, it will make a huge difference on your performance on race day for a triathlon to have the right bike. You can easily save 30 minutes by having the right bike, by having the right outfit, just being more aerodynamic. That's why you see these kind of shuttle looking, dildo-y looking kind of kit for triathlon. It makes you much faster, but you need to get the right gear for you. You need to have it adjusted. So it's going to be much more complicated than just having the right running vest or having underwears that you're not chafing when you're running 100 miles. In both sport, of course, some people will be naturally more gifted than others, and it will just go more seamlessly. For me, I think I'm very good at recovering. I'm very good at eating, and that makes me a good ultra runner. So it will depend on your different talent, but I feel that a naturally born athlete will perform better in a triathlon, whereas for an ultra marathon, even if you're not the most fit, if you have a strong mind, if you're able to stay on top of calories and these sorts of things, you can go a long way. And actually what you hear pretty often is that triathlon are so difficult because you have to master 3 different sports as opposed to ultramarathon. It's just one sport that you need to master. So for that one, actually, I kind of disagree. I think ultra running, yes, you only have to focus on one sport, but there's different aspects of it that are pretty important. Whereas for triathlon and Ironman, it's actually not true that you need to master all of them. You need to be good enough. And if you're a weaker runner, maybe you can compensate by being a good cyclist. Or if you're a poor swimmer like I am, you can make up for it during the run. And at the end of the day, an Ironman is mostly a cycling event in which you have a fair amount of running and a tiny bitsy of swimming. Whereas for ultra running, you can't compensate for poor fueling. If you're not good at fueling, you're game over. If you're not a good climber, maybe you could compensate by being a strong flat runner. And I would say associated to that is that I think I see a difference between how slow the ramp up is to achieve these goals versus how long it would take to master it. And I think an ultra marathon, it takes longer to be able to train up for it because the risk of injury when you're running for so long is very, very high. When you're increasing weekly mileage in your training, you're increasing the risk of injury and you need to be pretty slow for that. Whereas I feel that you can train for an Ironman a little faster because there's a reduced risk of injury. However, if you want to master it, if you're really pushing for time, it's going to be much more difficult for an Ironman, because you might want to hire a coach to fix your swimming. You might want to invest in a better bike, invest in a better position. So mastering the sport takes a very, very long time. So overall, I think actually when it comes to preparation, Ironman is much more challenging, much more time and resource consuming. And that's something that one needs to understand. But at the same time, that's something that can be very satisfying. If you're working on yourself, if you have some goals, say like losing weight or getting fit, I think Ironman is a good profile for that. So before we dive any deeper, I'm curious to hear, what do you think? Ironman, ultra running, do you have experience with both? What is your experience? Do you agree, disagree with my comparison? I know this is not my most typical type of movie, but hopefully this is helpful in inspiring you and understanding what's the next challenge for you. What do you want to do? Where do you want to push? Where do you want to grow? If you appreciate this video, please consider leaving a thumbs up. That's helping my video be seen by people, and I really appreciate it. Now we're moving to the big one, the one people talk about all the time, racing. And I guess the answer of what's hardest will be kind of answered a little bit more in this one. The first one is the level of pain. And an ultra marathon is much more challenging for that. The level of pain, a problem that you will face, and it's quite daunting. When you're running 100 mile, it might take you 30 hours, and you're already chafing, bleeding, 10 hour in. You have blisters, they pop, you have to run on it, the skin is pretty raw, you're sick. The level of pain and comfort is much higher, and then it will play with your head. Yeah, it's tough, and it's gonna be tough for a very, very long time. Whereas an Ironman, what makes it difficult is a little different. It's much less about, wow, just continuing is difficult, which is more of an ultra marathon. It's, wow, I can't do that anymore. I just want to stop. An Ironman is much more the difficulty from pushing the pace. You're running the marathon part of it. You're tired. You could always walk. Whereas that's not even an option sometimes. When you're running an ultra marathon, at some point, you're not even able to move anymore. Every step is so painful. Actually, for me, I think an ultra marathon is much more difficult for that. But based on my personality, it's much easier for me to convince myself to keep going no matter what. Whereas pushing the pace is something that I will quickly say, you know, this is not happening today. I'm not able to make a PR. I'm just gonna slow down and take care of myself. And that's probably the distinction. More in comfort in ultra running, but also there's a premium to taking care of yourself. Whereas for an Ironman, there's a premium on ignoring these things, and you just keep pushing to that finish line in terms of pace. And I mentioned it will play with your head. Mentally, it's going to be very challenging. And for that one too, I think an ultra marathon is much more difficult. Sometimes you go in the middle of the night, it's really cold, you might be scared, you might be worried, you have concerns about safety, you're all by yourself, you will hear wolves, or you're worried about bear in the middle of the night, which are, you know, kind of real danger, but you also face actual real danger. You're sleepwalking, stumbling, you have a difficulty just kind of focusing. Okay, yeah, you might trip, that doesn't sound so bad, but you might also be on a cliff, and if you trip at the wrong spot, you might tumble and die. Sometimes you'll have to go up a mountain pass, there's a huge thunderstorm, it becomes dangerous, and convincing yourself to go anyway can be very challenging. Nutrition is also something that is incredibly more difficult for 100 mile. And that's probably one of the exceptions where I said, you know, it doesn't matter the distance, but that one, it really matters. If you're comparing an Ironman that will take you maybe 15 hours to 100 mile, which will take you 24, 30 hours, it's gonna be much harder to fuel for that amount of time. But if you would compare an Ironman to 100K, which is more or less the same amount of time, I think nutrition is pretty similar in this case. Then a metric that we could actually look pretty easily is DNF rate. And DNF rates for 100 mile tend to be much higher than they are for an Ironman. For 100 mile, what I see typically are 40%, 50% DNF rate, all the way to 75. Whereas an Ironman, the ones I've seen, they tend to be more a 10% DNF rate. But again, that's one where if you lower the distance, then you will increase the finishing rate. So if you go for a 50 mile, it's probably closer to a 90%. In terms of danger, we discussed a little bit ultramarathon versus Ironman, but actually an Ironman is slightly more dangerous. There are people dying in an Ironman, and it's mostly in the swim for obvious reason. If you pass out running, that's not great. But if you pass out when you're swimming, you really just have a couple of minutes where the lifeguard has to see you and save you. And unfortunately, sometimes they're not able to act quickly enough. And then the last one about race day is how predictable is it? And for an Ironman, bad things can happen, unforeseen things can happen. The ones I've seen that are more common will be things like mechanical with your bike. You have a flat tire or something breaks and you need to fix it. And unfortunately, you go lean and some people will not have, too big to change, or they only have one and then they have two flat tires and then they're in trouble. So there are some unknown, but in ultra running, you're in for a surprise. Race never go according to plan and you will need to problem solve on the spot, otherwise you won't finish. And I think that for that ultra running, you really need to be good at problem solving. You can't eat anymore. What do you do? Your headlamp dies. What do you do? You get lost. What do you do? These sorts of things are extremely common, and you need to be able to quickly solve problems, to quickly readapt, and understanding that things won't go perfectly. First, I think there is a difference in personality between people that enjoy Ironman and people that enjoy trail running. Typically, people that are Ironman are people that are fairly competitive with themselves and to some extent with others. They want to finish first. They want to be fast. They want to perfect their skills. Whereas trail running, there's a tendency for more of a community approach, an approach that is a little bit more, this is not necessarily a competition. We're in this together. It's, yes, I'm competing with myself, I'm pushing my limit, but I will help my fellow runner, which is not something you would necessarily see in an Ironman. Don't expect in an Ironman for someone to stop their bike to help you fix your tire. That's, that is your problem. You should resolve it. An ultra marathon, if you fall down, if you're sick, people will stop and people will help you. Your headlamp is dead. Someone will give you a new one, or they will walk with you. They won't just leave you on the mountain because it could be dangerous. And that's a mindset that is a little different. So if you're more a type A personality and like you wanna compete, that's something that trail running might feel a little bit off for you. And that's really a good question for yourself. You need to be honest about what are you looking for? Why do you want to either run an Ironman or an ultra marathon? Is it to push your physical limit? Is it for bragging right? Is it to meet people? Is it to be fit, to lose weight, for the adventure? And these answers are pretty important because your experience racing these events will be very different. And a big difference I think that I see myself, and the main reason why Ironman is not necessarily for me, despite everything else that I said before, the key one is that I'm racing for adventure. Yes, it's to push my limit, but it's mostly for adventure. I want a point-to-point race where I cross mountain and I do this incredible journey. An Ironman doesn't feel like that. An Ironman feels much more like a physical feat, like a fitness feat. Like you're a stud, man. Like you're amazing. I truly believe that. Anyone racing an Ironman, like kudos. Like this is a difficult thing. Do you feel like an adventure? I think it's a little different. I think you feel an accomplishment. But the adventure side for me, I feel it much more in an ultra marathon, especially a point-to-point race. A race like Cocodona, going so far in Arizona. I feel like it's been a journey, an adventure that I've shared with other people. And that's what I'm looking for in these events. And that's what brings me back to ultra running. In conclusion, at the end of the day, it's not about what's the toughest necessarily. It's about what's right for you. And hopefully comparing, my experience Ironman, ultra running can help you have a vision of what you would prefer. But of course, I have a biased view. So I'd be curious in the comments below, what is your experience? Let us know in the comment below. I know this is a little bit outside of what I typically do in terms of video, but hopefully that helps you set your eyes on what's the right next adventure for you and push your own limit. If you appreciate this video, as always, please leave a thumbs up, leave a comment below and share it with your friend. See you next time.